This jar. You've grabbed one like it hundreds of times. Maybe there's one just like it in your kitchen right now. Golden, pleasing to the eye, with a little bear or bee on the label. Pure honey. Natural honey. 100% real honey. But what if I told you that what's in this jar is technically not honey? That American law allows a product to be sold under the name honey with zero quality checks? That the FDA, the U.S.'s main food safety agency, still has no official definition of what real honey even is? In 2011, the food safety watchdog Food Safety News tested 60 honey samples from U.S. stores. The result? In more than 75% of samples, pollen, the only thing that lets you trace where honey came from, had been completely filtered out. Missing pollen means one thing: you can't prove this is honey at all. And where does the money trail lead? China. Let's break down how an entire industry of deception costs Americans billions of dollars a year, and why authorities spent years pretending not to notice. First, a little love letter to honey, because it deserves one. Humans have been using honey for at least 8,000 years. It's the oldest sweetener known to mankind. Egyptians placed it in pharaohs' tombs, and thousands of years later, scientists found honey that still hadn't spoiled. Because real honey is one of the few foods that essentially never goes bad, thanks to its unique combination of low moisture, hydrogen peroxide, and acidic pH. But what's sold in most American supermarkets today is often not the product bees gathered in the fields. It's a substitute, an imitation, the product of one of the largest food fraud schemes in modern American history, a scheme that began in Chinese apiaries, passed through shell companies in India, Malaysia, and Vietnam, and ended up on your kitchen table. And all of it happens completely legally, because the U.S. still has no federal standard for honey. Let's start with the basics. Real honey is flower nectar processed by bees through enzymes in their salivary glands, regurgitated into the honeycomb, and ripened to the right moisture level. That doesn't sound very appetizing, but that's how it works. But the most important component is pollen. Every type of honey has a unique pollen fingerprint. Acacia honey, one type of pollen; buckwheat, another; cranberry, tangerine, lavender, each is identified by its pollen, the way a person is identified by a fingerprint. Pollen is the only way to prove three things: where the honey was collected, whether it's real, and whether it contains harmful substances. That's why, when Food Safety News tested 60 honey samples from major chains in 2011, Walmart, Target, Costco, Walgreens, McDonald's, KFC, they found 76% of samples had no pollen at all. At fast food restaurants, 100% of samples had no pollen. At some pharmacies, 100% had no pollen. Without pollen, honey is not honey by the standards of the World Health Organization, the Codex Alimentarius, the International Food Quality Standard, and dozens of EU countries. In Germany, such a product would be banned from being sold as honey. In the US, it sells by the millions of jars every day. Now to the heart of the scandal. In 2001, U.S. customs officials spotted a problem. Chinese honey was being mass imported at dumping prices, far below cost. An investigation revealed why. First, Chinese honey was found to contain chloramphenicol, an antibiotic banned in U.S. food products due to the risk of aplastic anemia, a bone marrow disease that can be fatal. Second, heavy metals were found, lead and other toxins. The U.S. imposed anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese honey, from 183% to 212%. And what did Chinese business do? It adapted. Chinese suppliers began laundering honey through third countries. The scheme became known as honey laundering. Honey is shipped from China to India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, or even Russia. There it's repackaged, the paperwork is changed, and it's suddenly Vietnamese or Indian honey, free of tariffs. In 2008-2010, the FBI and U.S. Customs ran Operation Honeygate. 8 people were arrested, and over $40 million in illegally imported honey was seized. One company alone, Grobe Farms of Michigan, pleaded guilty and paid $2 million in fines for importing honey through Asian shell companies. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The American honey industry consumes roughly 400 million pounds of product annually, while American beekeepers produce only about 150 million. The gap is imports, and oversight of those imports has been catastrophically weak for decades. But wait, someone might say, okay, pollen is missing, but why does that automatically mean fraud? Maybe some producers just filter more carefully? Yes, that's exactly what they say. Standard honey filtration is normal practice. It removes wax fragments, bee particles, debris. Pollen remains. Ultrafiltration is something else entirely. Honey is heated to very high temperatures and pushed through pressure filters that remove absolutely everything, including pollen. This process doesn't improve honey quality or extend shelf life. It does exactly one thing. It destroys evidence of origin. After ultrafiltration, it's impossible to establish where the honey was collected. Whether it's from China or Brazil, or whether it's actually a corn syrup solution with flavorings, traditional methods can't tell. That's why the Codex Alimentarius explicitly prohibits ultrafiltration and states that removing pollen automatically disqualifies a product from being called honey. In the U.S., there is no federal law on the subject. The FDA only published guidance standards for honey in 2018, not mandatory, but advisory. And now, the most unpleasant part. Missing pollen is not even the worst of it. The worst is that some products sold as honey contain minimal real honey, or none at all. How do you detect a fake? Modern science has several methods. C3, C4 isotope analysis detects corn or cane sugar additives because they have a different carbon isotope ratio than flower nectar. Nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, a snapshot of molecular composition that can't be faked. Pollen DNA analysis establishes exact geographic origin. In 2020, researchers from the University of Queensland, Australia, tested 100 honey samples from around the world using NMR. Result: more than 25% of samples showed signs of adulteration, addition of sugar syrup, or dilution. A 2021 European Commission study tested 320 honey samples from around the world and found that nearly 46% of samples from outside the EU were suspicious for adulteration. And a 2022 study from the University of Technology Malaysia found that some honeys on Asian markets contain more than 50% added sugar syrup. Understand the scale. Honey is the third most adulterated food product in the world, after olive oil and milk. But there's another character in this story that rarely gets mentioned: American beekeepers. According to the American Beekeeping Federation, the number of honeybee colonies in the U.S. has dropped from 6 million in the 1940s to roughly 2.7 million today. And it's not just about colony collapse disorder, the mysterious disease killing bees. It's also economics. An American beekeeper can't compete with Chinese honey priced several times lower because it's made from cheap inputs or is simply a sugar blend. Local honey in the U.S. costs $8.15 per pound. Mass-market supermarket honey costs $3.5. That price gap kills small businesses. In Washington state in 2022, more than 30 small apiaries closed, directly because of price competition from imported product. This is not an exception. It's a trend. So, where are we now? In 2023, the U.S. Congress received yet another bill, the Honey Laundering Act, that would require the FDA to establish federal honey standards and mandate pollen testing on imports. Status of that bill: under consideration, just like several previous similar ones. Food industry lobbyists actively fight any mandatory standards. The argument: this will complicate trade and raise prices for consumers. Not a word about health, not a word about antibiotics. But there's another dimension to this problem, and it's far broader. Bees pollinate 70–80% of all cultivated plants that end up on the human table. Almonds, apples, berries, avocados, watermelons. All of it depends on bees. By USDA estimates, bees' contribution to American agriculture is more than $15 billion per year. When we buy fake honey instead of real honey, we're not just paying for lower quality. We're killing an industry that supports living bees. Fewer beekeepers, fewer maintained hives, fewer bees, less produce on your plate. This isn't just a food scandal, it's an ecological time bomb. So, what do? How do you buy real honey? 3 practical rules. Look for honey with a specific regional origin. Florida orange blossom, Pacific Northwest wildflower, New York buckwheat. A generic label saying U.S. honey or just honey is a red flag. Buy from local beekeepers at farmers markets or specialty stores. You're much more likely to get an unfiltered product with live pollen. Check for certifications. USDA Organic doesn't guarantee no adulteration, but significantly lowers the risk. The True Source Honey Certificate, an independent organization that verifies the supply chain, is a more reliable indicator. And remember, real unfiltered honey crystallizes over time. If your honey has been liquid for years, that's not necessarily bad, but it's worth asking, why? To sum up our investigation. More than 70% of honey in American supermarkets has no pollen, meaning it cannot be identified as real honey by international standards. There is officially no federal honey standard in the U.S. The FDA only issued non-binding guidance in 2018. Millions of pounds of Chinese honey enter the U.S. each year through third countries, bypassing anti-dumping tariffs. Some products on the market contain added sugar syrup or are not honey at all. American beekeepers face direct economic losses, and the industry's decline threatens pollination of agricultural crops. Next time you pick up a golden jar labeled pure honey, ask yourself, does it have pollen? If the answer is, I don't know, you might be paying for chemicals packaged in pretty branding. And one last thing, we've broken down honey, but there's another product millions of Americans eat every day, convinced it's natural and healthy. Olive oil, the #1 most adulterated food in the world. By some estimates, up to 80% of extra virgin olive oil in the U.S. is a blend of cheaper vegetable oils with chlorophyll added for color. Want to find out how the Sicilian mafia controlled the olive oil market for decades? And why even expensive brands can be fake? Subscribe and hit the bell. And comment below, have you already checked the honey in your kitchen? Has it crystallized or not?